Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this book called Journey, an Illustrated History of the World's Greatest Travels. We're going to start our read-through of this book tonight. And this book was kindly donated to my channel by Jean-Marie. Thank you so much. I saw that this book had gone on sale, so I rushed to my wish list to purchase it and saw it was already gone. So, excellent. Perfect. I'm so glad to read this to you because it's a great book. So many interesting pictures and stories that I don't think I would have covered on my channel otherwise. But we're actually not going to start with chapter 1 tonight. We are going to start in the very back of the book. There are two really cool sections in here. One is a series of biographies of different explorers, and another, here's the biography section, is an itinerary list. If you want to partake on some of these voyages yourself, this tells you how to do it. So that's what we're going to start to read tonight. Starting in Africa, we have a Nile cruise in Egypt. Oh, hold on. There's a hair on my pencil. I can't have that. Okay. Some 90% of Egypt is desert, and the only habitable parts of the country are the fertile Nile Valley and Delta. The Nile River nourished the ancient Egyptian civilization, and it became a major trading route between the Mediterranean and the ancient kingdom of Nubia. Egyptians bartered their natural resources of gold, papyrus, grain, and linen for tropical hardwood, precious metals, incense, and myrrh. Long after the age of the pharaohs, monuments to these kings remained beside the river, which is why Thomas Cook led the first organized trip from Cairo to Aswan and back in 1869. Since then, a Nile cruise has been the quintessential Egyptian experience. The traditional Nile journey begins with an excursion from Cairo to the Great Pyramid of Giza, along with the necropolis of Saqqara, with its stepped pyramid. The pyramids are some of the most ancient and awe-inspiring monuments in Egypt, dating to around 2560 to 2510 BCE. Leaving Cairo, the boat heads upriver, making brief halts to Tel el-Amarna, site of the city of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, and Cana, with its temple of Dendara, before docking at Luxor. Formerly known as Thebes, Luxor was the capital of Egypt at the height of pharaonic power. It remains a vast open-air museum and boasts the greatest concentration of monuments in Egypt. Sorry about the train sounds. I think it's great, by the way. So, not sorry about the train sounds. On the east bank stand the Karnak and Luxor temples. The west bank holds the vast mortuary temples and valleys of royal tombs. The latter include the Valley of the Kings, where Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. The boat halts at 3 more temples on its way to Aswan, the last town before the border with Sudan. This hot, dry market town is a base for excursions to the late-period island temple of Philae and the colossal temple at Abu Simbel. Lake Nasser, dedicated to Lake Nasser, dedicated to Ramses II. Rapids hinder further travel south, so the boat turns around here and makes its way back to Cairo. Let's see. There's a lot of hair on my pencil. How did this happen? Okay, moving on. Next we have the Trans-Saharan route, trade route, Marrakesh to Rasani. There we go. Today we think of the Sahara Desert as completely inhospitable, indeed deadly to all those who enter it. But as long ago as the 4th and 5th centuries CE, it was crisscrossed by trading routes. The trade was conducted between the Berbers of North Africa, who lived in what are now Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, and the sub-Saharan Africans from Mali and the Kingdom of Ghana. The latter would load their camel caravans with prized commodities such as kola nuts, hides, ostrich feathers, skins, slaves, and above all, gold, while the Berbers supplied much-needed salt from the desert salt mines. Today it can be risky traveling to Mali, but it is still possible to get a flavor of the old caravan route. The town of Marrakesh lies to the north of the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. It began life as a trading post, and even today its Medina is still dominated by a sprawling souk. In this vast maze of narrow, shaded passageways, merchants set out their spices, brassware, silken garments, pottery, and maybe even the odd ostrich feather or egg. From the main southern gate of the still-walled city, a road strikes out across the dry plain and up into the mountains. It climbs over the Tizi-and-Chika Pass and sneaks down again to the town of Ouarzazate, which is the gateway to the desert. From here, a lonely road runs east through what the brochures call the Valley of the Kasbahs, after the tribal fortresses that line the route. Eventually it comes to the village of Risani, where a few ruins lie dotted among the palm groves. These are all that remain of Sijilmassa, a walled city that used to be the northern terminus of the Trans-Saharan caravan route. Once an African El Dorado, it was destroyed in the 16th century, then rebuilt and destroyed again by nomadic tribes in 1818. From Risani it is possible to drive a little farther, then suddenly the road runs out, and the giant sculptural dunes of the Sahara loom up ahead. The next stop is Timbuktu, 620 miles south. Next we have the Livingstone Trail. It goes through South Africa, Botswana, and Zambia, all the way up to there. The Scottish missionary and anti-slavery crusader David Livingstone was one of the greatest explorers of Africa. Today it is possible to visit many of the lands he passed through and to marvel at their beauty without having to endure the hardships that he faced. Carefully put this down. This book is so heavy. It's gigantic. As soon as Livingstone arrived at Cape Town, South Africa in 1841, he traveled north to take up a missionary post in the interior. These days it is worth stopping off in Cape Town. Table Mountain has beautiful trails to explore, and the vineyards of the Cape Winelands are only a short drive away, as are miles of beaches. Regular bus and rail services lead from Cape Town into the interior, but the best way to travel is aboard the Pride of Africa, one of the world's most luxurious trains. It rumbles northeast through the heart of the country, and has a viewing car for appreciating the surrounding bush country. Stops are made at the diamond mining town of Kimberley, and then Johannesburg and Pretoria. The route then heads north across the savannah and into Botswana. This is where Livingstone founded a mission at Kolobeng before he set out on his career as an explorer, crossing the Kalahari Desert to reach Lake Ngami in 1849. The railroad also crosses the Kalahari Desert before reaching the awe-inspiring Victoria Falls. In November 1855, Livingstone became the first European to set eyes on the falls, which the native people called Smoke That Thunders. They are still one of the natural wonders of the world today. From the Victoria Falls, trains carry on into Zambia, a country that is closely associated with Livingstone, who famously followed the course of the Zambezi River all the way to the Indian Ocean. Just a few miles north of the river is the modern city of Livingstone, which was named after the explorer. From here it is possible to carry on to Lake Tanganyika, where Livingstone spent the last years of his life searching unsuccessfully for the source of the Nile. Moving on to Asia. This book is so heavy, you guys. It's very hard to control. Next, we are traveling from Angkor Wat to Ho Chi Minh City through Cambodia into Vietnam. There we go. At 2,700 miles, the Mekong is the longest river in Southeast Asia, stretching from the Himalayan plateau to southern Vietnam and finally draining into the South China Sea. A stunning waterway, second only to the Amazon in terms of its wildlife. It was virtually unknown until a French expedition set off to explore it in 1866, hoping to prove that the river was navigable and could provide a vital trading artery between Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City, and China. The Mekong nourished the Khmer Empire, which bloomed in the 8th century. So the ideal trip starts at its former capital of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. A masterpiece of Khmer architecture, Angkor Wat is a vast temple complex originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. Its 12th century lotus bud-like spires and walled compounds are covered with elaborate carved bas-reliefs depicting historical events and mythological tales. The temple was abandoned when the Khmer Empire declined in the 14th century and disappeared beneath the encroaching jungle. It was virtually unknown in the West until French explorer Henri Mouhot found it in the mid-19th century. Parts of the complex have been left unrestored, and the jungle is creeping back over it once more. The resort town of Siem Reap is only a few miles from Angkor Wat and provides a base for exploring the temples. It is also the riverside port for boats that sail south across the Great Lake, known as Tonle Sap, and to the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh, which is on the Mekong River. The journey leads through floating villages and markets, and passes colorful pagodas and temples. From Phnom Penh, you can head north up the Mekong to Kratie, which is a good base for trekking through the jungle. The alternative is to carry on south, crossing into Vietnam and passing through the Mekong Delta. This is an idyllic landscape of canals, streams, and bright green paddy fields. The final destination is Ho Chi Minh City. The city is now an appealing blend of French colonial landmarks and bustling 21st century commerce. See next. Drag this over. It's the Great Wall of China, which you can see stretching up here and all down there. And all up here. It's a big one. The Great Wall of China is the longest wall in the world and one of the most impressive structures ever built by humans. Visiting it is a journey in itself, and many European explorers have traveled to see it with their own eyes. An early form of the wall was built in 220 to 206 BCE, after the unification of the country under its first emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, to prevent invasion and to protect Silk Road trade. Millions of soldiers, peasants, and prisoners toiled to build the wall, many of them dying in the process. After falling into disrepair, the wall was rebuilt during the Ming Dynasty, and most of what survives today dates from that time. The Great Wall of the Ming Dynasty stretched for more than 5,500 miles and ran from Xinjiang province in the far west of China to the Yellow Sea in the east. Today, much of it has once again fallen into disrepair, and long sections of it are missing, but the historic structure has been restored to a semblance of its former glory. The most popular section of the wall is at Badaling, 44 miles west of Beijing. It was extensively renovated in the 1980s and even has a zip line for those with a head for heights. More spectacular and less busy is Mutianyu, which lies 56 miles north of Beijing. Here, a 7,380-foot section of the wall snakes through numerous watchtowers as it winds through the hills. It can be reached by cable car or chairlift. The best place to get a sense of the Great Wall is its unreconstructed state in Simitai, 68 miles northeast of Beijing. It is the starting point of a 5-mile trek along the wall to Jinshanling, and few tourists venture here. Parts of the wall are incredibly steep. The Heavenly Ladder has an 80-degree gradient, and in places the steps are worn and the towers are crumbling. However, for those fit enough to undertake the 5-hour walk, the views amply reward the effort. Its highest point is Watching Beijing Tower, which stands at 3,235 feet. From here at night, it is possible to see the lights of Beijing shimmering in the distance some 75 miles away. Next, we are going to the Three Gorges in China. You can see we're starting in Chongqing up to Wuhan. The Yangtze is the third longest river in the world, stretching for 3,900 miles from the Tibetan Plateau in the west to the East China Sea. Connecting the interior with the coast, it is a major artery for China and one of the busiest waterways in the world, used for transporting coal, goods, and passengers. The river is best known for a relatively short 120-mile section in its middle reaches. Here, between Chongqing and Yichang, is an area of great natural beauty, known as the Three Gorges. As the Yangtze passes through the Kutang Wu and Xiling Gorges, its waters squeeze between sheer towering cliffs that are less than 328 feet apart in the narrowest places. Sorry, I was admiring the picture up there a bit. That's cool. And now I've lost it. There it is. The approach view of the Kutang is so famous that it features on the Chinese 10-1 note. Many cruise ships meander through the gorges. There we go. Carefully set this back down. It's going to wobble. Okay. Through the gorges, taking 3 days to complete the trip. A typical cruise makes several stops along the way so that passengers can visit temples and other ancient sites. Passengers can also transfer to smaller boats to explore what are known as the lesser gorges, and then to even smaller boats to venture up some of the Yangtze's many tributaries. Since the 1990s, one of the most striking sights on the river has been the Three Gorges Dam, the largest dam project and hydropower station in the world, which was completed in 2006. But in the Kutang Gorge, it generates electricity and reduces the risk of floods further downstream. By raising the level of the river, it also broadens it, which increases the Yangtze's shipping capacity. The higher water levels make the surrounding cliffs and mountains seem smaller, but the area is still spectacular. Controversially, building the dam meant that some 1.3 million people had to be relocated. As a result, the boats now sail over ghost towns submerged beneath the water. In order to pass the dam, all shipping has to pass through a sequence of gigantic stepped locks, which is a dramatic experience in itself. Next we have the very, very famous Darjeeling Himalayan Railway. You can see looks like we start in New Jaipaguri and go up to Darjeeling. Many great train journeys boast fantastic scenery, but the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway is unique. After taking the toy train from Siliguri to Darjeeling in 1896, the American author Mark Twain wrote that the journey was so wild and interesting and exciting and enchanting that it ought to take a week. Covering just 48 miles, the journey is not particularly long, but over that modest distance, the winding single-track railroad chugs uphill from around 328 feet above sea level to some 7,218 feet. Its narrow gauge tracks are only 2 feet wide, and it is pulled by a tiny steam locomotive, hence its nickname, the toy train. See it? Cute. Despite appearances, however, it is a genuine service that runs 16 trains each day, except when the line is blocked by landslides. Like so many hill railroads built by the British in India, the main purpose of the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway was to give them easy access to the cooler climes of the hills to escape the heat of summer. Darjeeling itself, set amid the tea plantations of West Bengal, became a home away from home for many British expats who built colonial homes there. Completed in 1881, the railroad connects the major rail junction of New Jaipur. How come I can't say that? That is an L. Jalpaiguri. I've never heard of New Jalpaiguri before. It connects the major rail junction at New Jalpaiguri Jalpaiguri. This is how I learn how to say things. I just say it over and over until I get it. Jalpaiguri. The major rail junction of New Jalpaiguri with Darjeeling, and stops at 13 stations on the way. From New Jalpaiguri, the line climbs rapidly, gaining height with the aid of frequent reversing stations, which are Z-shaped lines of track that enable a train to shunt forward, backward, and then forward again, climbing a section of hill each time. The track is also looped in places to help the trains gain altitude quickly. The line runs alongside the equally vertiginous hill cart road, which it crosses several times, the trains honking their horns at oncoming traffic. The full journey takes a painfully slow 8 hours, but it is well worth it for the scenery. The train crosses through semi-tropical valleys, tea plantations, lush forest, and villages where the shops almost tumble onto the tracks. The line's highest point and the location of the highest station in India is at Ghum, outside Darjeeling. Here, on a clear day, the dramatic panorama of the Himalayas is revealed, dominated by Kanchenjunga, the world's 3rd highest mountain. And where are we going next? That picture should give you a little light. We're going to the Golden Triangle of Agra, Jaipur, and Delhi. The Golden Triangle is formed of 3 of India's most memorable cities. They are relatively close together and are connected by good rail links, or one incredible rail link if you are prepared to pay for it. The Indian railroads are the oldest in Asia, established by the British in the 19th century. The first major rail line between Bombay and Calcutta opened in 1870, and within 3 decades of that year, there were 40,000 miles of track. London-based travel guide publisher John Murray published the first comprehensive handbook for travel in India in 1891. It noted that a trip there was no longer a formidable journey, and that the Englishman who undertakes it merely passes from one portion of the British Empire to another. The key sites then as now are the Golden Triangle of Delhi, Agra, and Jaipur, so called for the almost equilateral triangle that the 3 cities make when plotted on a map, and the wonderful sights that they offer. Delhi boasts the towering 12th century Qutb Minar and the Mughal Humayun's tomb and Red Fort, as well as colonial buildings from the days of the British Raj, and the vast teeming bazaars of Old Delhi. Agra is the location of the Taj Mahal and the Agra Fort. It is also the gateway to nearby Fatehpur Sikri, a magnificent fortified city that was once the capital of the Mughal Empire. The third point of the triangle, the pink city of Jaipur, is the ancient capital of the desert province of Rajasthan. A glorious city of palaces and bazaars, it is a good base for visiting the exquisite Amber Fort, high on a hilltop a few miles out of town. All 3 cities can be reached fairly easily, using express trains or buses. There is also the luxurious Palace on Wheels. This award-winning train service visits all 3 locations, as well as the beguiling lakeside city of Udaipur in the southwest, down there. We're staying in India for one last journey down the Ganges River. Going all the way down. It looks like all the way down to Kolkata. Well, one of the greatest rivers on earth, the Ganges, has its source in the icy Himalayas and flows 1,569 miles southeast to the Bay of Bengal in the Indian Ocean. It is sacred to Hindus who worship the river as the goddess Ganga. The Ganges has drawn pilgrims to it throughout history, so to follow its course is to undertake a journey through the spiritual heart of India. A good place to start is Rishikesh in the Himalayan foothills. This is where the Beatles went in the late 1960s when they became followers of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The town is dotted with temples, both ancient and modern. Here we go. And it is still a major center for studying yoga and meditation and is full of pilgrims clad in orange. A more traditional Hindu city is Haridwar, which stands at the place where the Ganges emerges from the Himalayas. Here, pilgrims come in droves to bathe in the fast-flowing river at sunrise. It is especially busy during the pilgrimage season from May to October, when thousands of Hindus descend upon the city. The season peaks in July. From Haridwar, there is a train to Allahabad, then a change for the most holy of all Hindu sites, Varanasi, also known as Benares. I've never heard that. I've only heard it as Varanasi. The city is famous for the ghats, or stone steps, that line the Ganges. Every day, thousands of Hindus come to these ghats to pray and to cleanse themselves of their sins in the sacred waters of the river. 2 ghats are also used to cremate bodies on bonfires, tended by relatives and watched by the general public. When the pyres are burnt out, the ashes are scattered in the river, in the belief that this will benefit the soul of the departed. One of the best ways to watch this scene is from a boat on the river, which gives a vantage point for seeing people going about their daily ablutions by day or torchlit activities by night. Varanasi enables visitors to experience what Hindu pilgrimage is all about. Oh, I see. This just goes to Varanasi, but the river continues. I was about to say, I don't think you can sail all that way. Anyway, let's go to the Spice Islands of Indonesia. The recent history of the Maluku Islands, formerly known as the Moluccas, is not a happy one. They form an archipelago in Indonesia that split into 2 provinces in 1999. Let me slide this over. Boom, boom. There we go. Creating conflict between Muslim and Christian islanders, which resulted in 500,000 people being displaced. This was not the first time that people had fought over the islands. Famed for the nutmeg, mace, and cloves that grow there, they had formerly been known as the Spice Islands. At a time when spice was worth more than gold, the islands were long sought after by seafaring Europeans. The Portuguese finally located them in the 16th century, but this only brought them into conflict with the Dutch and the English. The Dutch built forts throughout the islands, and the English restricted themselves to the Isles of Ai and Run. The islands' monopoly on spice was broken in the 18th century, and since then Maluku had settled into gentle obscurity. Due to poor transportation, very few tourists go there, but regular flights from cities around Indonesia land in Ambon, the capital of Maluku. Here, the Dutch influence is still evident in the old colonial buildings that remain, and the fact that half of the population is Christian. The town also famously serves as a gateway to the nearby Banda Islands. Reached by fast boat service or a short hop in a 12-seater airplane, the 10 picturesque Banda Islands were once at the heart of the Dutch spice trade. The capital, Banda Nera, on the central island of Pulau Nera, is scattered with historic relics. These include Bentong Nassau, a fortress in which some 44 local leaders were beheaded and quartered by the Dutch in 1621. There are many other forts scattered among the islands, long since neglected and crumbling away. Old nutmeg smokehouses can also be found, nestled in nutmeg groves dotted with huge mango and almond trees. However, most people come for the paradisial white beaches, the underwater coral gardens, the jungle trails, and the striking scenery that includes volcanoes, one of which erupted as recently as 1988. See where we're going next. I haven't read this far in the book, so I really don't know where we're going next. I'm going in blind with you guys. Looks like we're heading over to Jerusalem. Slide this down. Okay, here we go. Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been a center of pilgrimage for Jews, Muslims, and Christians for thousands of years. Jewish pilgrims have been visiting since Solomon reputedly became the king of Israel and built the first temple there in around 970 to 931 BCE. Jews believe that the temple was built over the foundation stone from which the world was created, on which Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. The first temple was destroyed, then rebuilt as the second temple, and then destroyed again in ancient times. All that remains today is the Kotel, or Western Wall, which is thought to be a section of the retaining wall of the Second Temple. It is considered holy by modern Jews because it is the closest they can get to their former place of worship. The site of the temple has been a holy Muslim precinct ever since Islamic forces captured Al-Quds, or Jerusalem, in 637 BCE. To Muslims, the temple site is the Haram al-Sharif, or noble sanctuary, visited by the Prophet Muhammad on what is known as his night journey from Mecca to Al-Quds in heaven. The sacrificial stone that once lay at the heart of the Jewish temple is now covered by the Dome of the Rock, the octagonal Islamic shrine with a golden dome raised in 691 BCE. The precinct has several other religious buildings, including Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is used all year round, especially on the holy day of Friday and during the holy month of Ramadan. Christians have been present in Jerusalem since the time of Jesus Christ. Their focus of worship is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built in about 325 BCE by Constantine, the first Christian emperor, over the cave in which the body of Jesus was supposedly laid to rest. Other sites around the city are linked with the Last Supper, Christ's route on his way to be crucified, the Via Dolorosa, and the crucifixion itself. All of the sites, whether Jewish, Islamic, or Christian, still attract thousands of pilgrims a year. It is not necessary to be religious, however, to appreciate the weight of history that bears down upon Jerusalem and its extraordinary architecture and culture. We're going to hop to the other end of Asia, to the Shikoku pilgrimage in Japan. Make sure you can see all of it there. Shikoku is the smallest and least populated of the 4 main islands of Japan. It is the location for the country's most famous pilgrimage route, a 745-mile loop all around the island known as the 88 Temple Pilgrimage. Thousands of Japanese undertake the circuit, or part of it, by tour bus every year. A smaller number of hardy souls does it on foot. Walking, which generally takes around 50 days, is truer to the spirit of the pilgrimage's founder, Kobudaishi, a wandering holy man who helped to establish Buddhism in Japan. But it requires good physical fitness, as the route is long and hilly. The circuit begins in Tokushima-ken, site of the first 23 of the 88 temples, and it is best to visit the temples in a clockwise direction, following the signs, to avoid getting lost. At each temple, the henro, or pilgrim, dressed in a hakue, or white jacket, and conical hat, performs a series of rituals that culminates in a chant of the Heart Sutra, a Buddhist prayer. One of the temple's monks then marks the pilgrim's book, which can be bought at the first temple with the red seal, and writes down the name of the temple and the date on which it has been visited. Some temples specialize in blessings for ill health, passing exams, or getting pregnant. One of the temples, at a place called Uwajima, has a sex museum full of ancient fertility objects, as well as adult Japanese art. A highlight is Zensuji, the 75th temple and the largest one on the route, which is where Kobodaishi was born. The route between the temples meanders through rugged terrain, but the path follows the coast and avoids the mountains, offering wonderful views of the Pacific Ocean. On the coast, a place called Ishite, a giant statue of Kobodaishi, stares contemplatively out to sea. Local residents traditionally support pilgrims by offering them a bed for the night, but there are also guest houses along the way. Let's go to the main island and explore Mount Fuji. Sorry about the wibble wobbles, but this book is so heavy, and I'm in the very back of it, so there's all this weight over here and none over here. Doing my best. Here, we're gonna go halfway. Mount Fuji. There's a Japanese proverb that says, "A wise man climbs Fuji once, a fool climbs it twice," because Japan's highest peak is without a doubt a tough ascent. It is not hard in the way that Everest is. The climbers are unlikely to die, but the ascent is demanding, and the views from the top are scant reward. That is, if the summit is not wreathed in clouds. Mount Fuji definitely looks at its most spectacular seen from a distance, so that you can appreciate the snow-capped profile of this near-perfectly shaped volcano. But climbing it is a uniquely Japanese experience. According to legend, Fuji was the abode of a fire goddess who would display her displeasure from time to time by making the volcano erupt. On the occasion of the last eruption in 1707, ash covered the streets of Tokyo some 60 miles away. The combination of its conical form and power has meant that Fuji has long been revered as a sacred Shinto shrine. There are several routes up the mountain, and the ascent is divided into sections known as stations. These days, most people take a bus to the Kawaguchiko, or 5th station, which is about halfway up. Here, a Swiss chalet-style gift shop marks the end of the road. Traditionally, however, pilgrims would begin at Fujiyoshita and pay their respect to the gods before embarking on a walk of around 5 hours just to get to Kawaguchiko. From here, it takes another 6 hours of steady walking in order to reach the summit. It is a Japanese tradition to climb the volcano at night and watch sunrise from the summit. There is a series of huts en route that provide restorative food and basic accommodation. At the summit, the crater has a circumference of some 2.4 miles, which takes about 1 hour to walk. There is a post office at the top of the mountain, and the Japanese like to mail a letter so that it arrives with a Mount Fuji souvenir postmark. The peak times for climbing Mount Fuji are July and August, when the weather is at its mildest. Either side of these months, it can be extremely cold and snowy up at the top of Japan. It's such a beautiful mountain, isn't it? I love, the sacred mountains of the world because there's just something about them. You're like, yeah, that is pretty important. Looks like we're staying in Japan for one more trip down the old Tokaido Road. Hold on. My poor book. There we go. Okay. One of 5 important paved routes of the Edo period, the Tokaido Road connected Edo, which is present-day Tokyo, with Kyoto, and followed the southeastern coast of the island of Honshu. It was an extremely busy route and was mostly traveled on foot, horseback, or in the case of nobles by kago, a type of palanquin which was carried by bearers. Famous for its spectacular views, the Tokaido was a popular subject in literature and art. Japanese most famous poet Matsuo Basho wrote about his travels along it, and the artist Hiroshige has depicted the 53 rest stations along the road in a series of woodblock prints. Today, the Tokaido is still a major thoroughfare with 2 motorways and 2 railroad lines, one of which carries the bullet train from Tokyo to Kyoto. Sections of the old Tokaido Road still exist, though, meandering through some stunning Japanese scenery. Oh, there it is. Wow. And make ideal trails for trekking. The most popular section to walk over is the Hakone Pass. It is not far from Tokyo and can be reached by suburban train. Walkers start at the Hakone Yumoto station, from which it is a steep climb on a road of large, rough stones that snakes up and over hills densely forested with bamboo and cypress trees. On the way, the road passes the Amazake Jaya, an old thatched wooden rest house where travelers can stop for a drink of green tea. Eventually, the road reaches the crest of a hilly ridge and descends toward the small town of Motohakone on the shores of Lake Ashi, a beautiful lake in an old volcanic crater with views of Mount Fuji. Before this, it comes to the Hakone Sekisho, or barrier. This was a government checkpoint, often decorated with the crucified remains of criminals, but it is now the site of a small museum. There is a train back to Tokyo at Motohakone. For an easier hike, it is best to follow the route in the opposite direction, so that most of the walking is downhill. That makes sense. Let's hop back over to the Middle East to explore Petra and Wadi Rum. Here we go. When 27-year-old Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt found his way into Petra in August 1812, he was the first European in over 600 years to visit the ruined desert city. Petra was once a wealthy trading center, home to 30,000 people, and the capital of the ancient Nabatean Empire. These desert dwellers operated a loosely controlled trading network, which centered on oases in what are today Jordan, Syria, and Israel. After the Nabateans are conquered and absorbed by the Roman Empire, Petra fell into decline and was eventually abandoned and forgotten by everyone but the local Bedouins, who kept its presence secret from outsiders. Today, visitors drive down from the Jordanian capital Amman to the small town of Wadi Musa, which is just a few miles from the entrance to Petra. Let's slide over the heavy book. Oh, it's getting heavier the more pages I turn. The ancient site is approached by means of a narrow, winding, steeply sided gorge known as the Sikh. It emerges dramatically in front of the towering temple-like treasury building, and even the presence of other tourists cannot diminish the thrill of discovery. The whole of Petra is carved from pinkish-red sandstone, with arches, columns, and doorways etched into the sheer rock faces. The haunting ruins that remain include temples and churches, a semicircular amphitheater, and a stunning cliff-top monastery that is reached by an ancient rock-cut path with more than 800 steps. A couple of hours to the south of Petra along the King's Highway, an ancient route that once ran from Heliopolis in Egypt to Palmyra in Syria, is Wadi Rum. This wild desert valley was also formerly occupied by the Nabateans, and there is a small temple here, but the ancient ruins are eclipsed by the overwhelming natural glories, which represent some of the most spectacular desert scenery in the world. Sheer-sided rocky outcrops loom up out of the desert, and erosion by the harsh desert winds and sand has created gigantic sandstone mushrooms, rock bridges, and canyons. The landscape is so eerie and otherworldly that it was used to represent Mars in the Ridley Scott movie The Martian. Let's head to Nepal to the Annapurna circuit. Let's see. We start near Kathmandu, this Saharan, all the way up to Pokhara, it says. Let's read about it. You do not have to be a mountaineer to experience the thrill of the Himalayas. There are spectacular trails in the lower reaches of the ranges that take trekkers to places that feel just like the top of the world, without the need for crampons and ice axes. The Annapurna circuit, for example, which is regarded by many as the best long-distance trek in the world, it is a 128-mile horseshoe-shaped route that circles around central Nepal's Annapurna range, which includes one peak that is over 26,000 feet and 13 peaks over 23,000 feet. The scenery is stupendous. The trek begins after a 7-hour drive from Kathmandu at Besisahar in the Marsyangdi River Valley and into the city of Pokhara, with tea houses and lodges all along the route. At the start, there are spectacular views of terraced paddy fields and subtropical forests, including several waterfalls, gigantic cliffs, and Nepali villages. The trek progresses through a tall, dense pine forest, from which there are occasional glimpses of the mountains ahead. On the way, there are constant reminders that the path follows an ancient trade route that is still very much in use today. Truckers can expect to meet caravans of donkeys laden with supplies of food and fuel being delivered to villages and stores. The trail finally emerges from the forest to a stunning view of lofty mountains all around, and a steady climb begins to the highest point on the circuit. The pass at, Torongla. I need to move this. There we go. Torongla, which is a 17,769 feet in altitude. From here, the trail descends to Muktinath, a town sacred to both Buddhists and Hindus, where water shoots from 108 springs and a natural gas flame burns on top of water in one of the temples. Hindus believe that Muktinath is the only place on earth where the 5 elements exist in their distinct forms. It sounds like nirvana, but from here there are still another 4 days of walking to complete the circuit. Get this page turned. I think we're just going to stop at Asia tonight, but there's a couple more, it looks like. Make sure I'm not skipping a page. No. All right. Let's go to base camp. Ooh. There we go. Everest Base Camp in Nepal. Mount Everest captivated the hearts of mountaineers when the first attempts on the summit were made in the 1920s. There we go. Since then, the names of some of those who have climbed the mountain, George Mallory, Edmund Hillary, Tenzing Norgay, have passed into history. Many thousands have followed in their footsteps, risking their lives just to stand at the highest point on Earth. However, there is an easier goal for travelers who simply want a really close view of the famous mountain, and that is a trek to Everest Base Camp, at which point, of course, they turn back. The base camp is where would-be climbers of Everest spend a few days acclimating to the height to reduce the risks of altitude sickness. It lies 17,598 feet above sea level, some 11,430 feet shy of the summit. There's not a lot to see there. It looks like a makeshift refugee camp in the snow with lots of fluttering prayer flags, but there is a thrill to be standing at the foot of Everest with its breathtaking scenery. On the way in, there's also a taste of Sherpa culture, courtesy of several local monasteries and museums. The adventure begins at Kathmandu, from where you fly to Lukla, a remote place with no roads or cars, which is located at an altitude of 9,383 feet. The Tenzing Hillary Airport is literally an airstrip in the middle of nowhere, and often features on lists of the world's most dangerous airports. From there you walk from village to village along well-defined paths, sleeping in tea houses, where meals of dal bhat, which is delicious lentil soup with rice, if you've never had dal, oh my gosh, and plenty of water are served. Experts advise taking it slowly, walking 3 to 7 hours per day, to give the body time to acclimate. The entire trek usually takes 12 days in all, 8 days, including rest days, to base camp, plus 4 to get back down. Many people who have completed it say that it is worth it just for the euphoria on the way down, because you feel lighter with each step as the altitude decreases. That and the welcome prospect of a hot shower at the end of it. How interesting. All right, let's head over to Oman, the frankincense route. This way or this way? Let's go there. Arabia has been famously fragrant since the earliest of times. Greek and Roman authors wrote of an Arabia scented with spices and perfumes. Many of these fragrances were imported, but there is one that is entirely indigenous to the southern Arabian Peninsula, frankincense. It is an aromatic resin obtained from a particular type of tree, the boswellia, which is common in Somalia, Yemen, and Oman above all. Even today, Oman is permeated with frankincense. The place to find it is the city of Salalah, in the southwest of the country, about as far from the Omani capital of Muscat as it is possible to go without crossing the border into Yemen. The souk here is full of frankincense, among other aromatics, which is bought by locals and burned in their houses, not only to make them fragrant, but to keep pests away. It is burned at celebrations, too, especially births and weddings. In Salalah, there is even a museum dedicated to frankincense. The city is also a good base for visiting the frankincense groves in nearby Wadi Dhaka. Here the spiny trees grow in a wide, stony valley, and it is possible to see how the resin is harvested. Hand-sized pieces of bark are cut from the trees, which makes the sap rise and congeal on the exposed surfaces. There it hardens into milky blobs and beads that are then scraped off, creating frankincense. Less than an hour's drive along the coast from Salalah lie the ruins of an ancient trading city of Sumharam. As far back as the 1st century BCE, this was one of the major ports of southern Arabia, and was vital to the international frankincense trade. Ships left here for Egypt and India. It was abandoned in the 5th century CE, perhaps due to the encroachment of a sandbar, so little remains to be seen, but it is in a lovely setting on a small hill above the tranquil waters of the Korori Creek. Let's explore the Trans-Siberian Railway. Look at it go. Okay, I have to set this blue. Here it goes. Boom. Okay. Look at this path. Wow. There is no one train called the Trans-Siberian, nor is there a single rail route with the name. The Trans-Siberian Railway is a vast Russian railroad network that connects Europe with Asia. There are 3 main Trans-Siberian routes, all of which begin at Moscow's Yaroslavsky station. From there, the original Trans-Siberian route is served by a train called the Rossiya, the Russia, which departs every other day on a 6-night, 5,752-mile journey to Vladivostok in the far east of Russia. Many travelers, however, opt for either the Trans-Manchurian, which is a weekly service aboard the Vostok to Beijing via Manchuria, or the weekly Trans-Mongolian, which travels to Beijing via Mongolia and the Gobi Desert. Parts of these routes are also served by other railroads. The Trans-Siberian experience begins with settling into the small train compartment that will be home for roughly a week. For those who are sharing, most compartments have 4 beds. There is ample time to get to know their traveling companions, as well as the provodnitsa, the female attendant stationed in each carriage. There is little to do except watch the slowly changing scenery outside, making tea using the hot water from the samovar in the corridor, read, and doze. Keeping track of the time can be tricky as the train passes through up to 7 different time zones. Passengers fall prey to a gently disorienting train lag and end up sleeping at odd hours. An added complication is that all the timetables, station clocks, and train clocks in Russia remain on Moscow time and only revert to local time when in China and Mongolia. All 3 trains stop at many places along the way, but they are working services, not tourist trains, so the stops are never long enough to allow passengers to get off and explore. The Russians use the stops to stretch their legs and buy food from some of the itinerant vendors on the platform. For those who do want to break up the long journey and see something along the way, the most popular places are Yekaterinburg, for its rich Tsarist history, Irkutsk, for magnificent Lake Baikal, and Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia. Alright, one more page I think. Let me see. Australasia is next. Let me see. Okay, we'll read Australasia too. Hold on. Okay. We're gonna stop at Asia. We're gonna stop at Asia. Otherwise, I'm gonna wind up reading the whole thing, and this will be a 4-hour video, and I'll have no voice. But anyway, let's go to Mecca. Pilgrimage to Mecca. Mecca has been the center of pilgrimage for Muslims since the Prophet Muhammad himself led the pilgrimage, known as the Hajj, in 632 CE, the year of his death. The city is regarded as so holy that only Muslims can enter. Every Muslim must make the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their life, if they are physically able. The Hajj begins on the 8th day of the Dhu al-Hijjah, which is the 12th month of the Muslim lunar calendar, and finishes on the 13th day. During this time, up to 3 million pilgrims pour into Mecca to participate in the world's largest annual gathering of people. Most fly into the nearby coastal city of Jeddah and then travel to Mecca by road. The idea of the Hajj is to remind Muslims that everybody is equal in the eyes of Allah, or God. It is also meant to bring Muslims of all nationalities together, cleansing them of sin and bringing them nearer Allah. The Hajj begins at stations known as Miqat, just outside Mecca, which pilgrims cannot cross until they are appropriately dressed. For men, this means wearing just 2 white sheets, known as ihram, one wrapped around the waist, the other draped over the shoulder. For women, the only stipulation is to dress modestly. Pilgrims then recite the Taybiyah, a prayer to announce to Allah that they have arrived for Hajj. There are then several days of prescribed rituals, the first known as Tawaf, in which pilgrims walk around the Kaaba, the holiest shrine in Islam, 7 times in a counterclockwise direction. Muslims believe that the origins of the rituals of the Hajj go back to the time of the Prophet Ibrahim. Other rituals include passing between the hills of Safa and Marwa in Masjid al-Haram. Prayers prayers behind the station of Abraham, and drinking water from the spring of Zamzam. Just that little bit at the top. Let's check out Cappadocia, which there's some fairy chimneys there in Cappadocia in Turkey. In the 1960s, when hippies set off from cities all over Europe in search of spiritual enlightenment in India via the hash cafes of Afghanistan, the true starting point for their trip was Istanbul. It was here that Europe started to recede, replaced by a dreamy skyline of minarets, the floating calls of the muezzin, and clouds of dense white smoke from the shisha pipes in the coffee houses of the Golden Horn. The first port of call was invariably a restaurant just up from the ancient hippodrome called the Pudding Shop. This was the place to find like-minded company and pick up the latest information on the route ahead. The Pudding Shop is no more, but the restaurants on that same busy street, Yerebatan Kadesi, remain popular with visitors. At Istanbul, it was just a brief ferry ride across the Bosporus to reach Asia, and then a bus onward across the heartland of Turkey, while some choose to travel the coast and drop out on some secluded beach. The aim for most travelers was to make straight for Cappadocia. Today, most people fly direct from Istanbul. Arriving at Cappadocia is like landing on another planet. It is a geological oddity of rock towers called fairy chimneys, shaped by natural erosion. Over the ages, people have bored into the soft stone to create cave-like residences inside the towers and across the barren countryside, riddling the area with fascinating cavern architecture. There are ancient churches and other historical sites, but most of the caves are still in use, serving as accommodation, restaurants, and bars. To get the best overview of this extraordinary fairy tale landscape, numerous operators run balloon flights. The ideal time to take these is at dawn, when the rising sun casts an unearthly pink tinge over the scene. And lastly, we're going to Bukhara and Samarkand in Uzbekistan to explore the Silk Road. Here comes book. Okay. Dubbed the region that time forgot, Central Asia was once the middle passage for merchant caravans traveling along the ancient Silk Road between China and Constantinople. They traded silk, tea, spices, silver, gold, and other goods, and the region grew rich as a result. Emperor Timur, also known as Tamerlane, used the money to fund military campaigns that extended his rule across Persia, Iraq, and all the way to Delhi. However, once the sea route around Africa was discovered in the 15th century, the trade wealth vanished, and Central Asia dropped off the map. Even today, thanks to their legacy as post-Soviet republics, the countries that now make up the region are seldom visited by outsiders. Yet in Uzbekistan, the former Timurid cities of Bukhara and Samarkand are graced by some of the most exquisite medieval Islamic architecture to be found anywhere in the world. Bukhara is a former center of Islamic learning with approximately 140 protected historic buildings, a collection, one visitor in 1938 wrote, that rivals the finest architecture of the Italian Renaissance. Its slightly ramshackle mud brick center appears not to have changed much in 2 centuries, and it remains one of the best places to get a glimpse of what the world looked like at the time of the Silk Road. In contrast, modern Samarkand is a Soviet-built sprawl of broad avenues and brutalist buildings, but it surrounds some magnificent monuments. Samarkand boasts the magnificent Registan, a grand public square that is flanked by 3 vast madrasas, which are Islamic teaching schools, as well as the imposing Bibi Kanim Mosque, Gure Emir, Timur's mausoleum, and the hillside tomb complex of Shah-i-Zinda. All are covered by intricately patterned mosaic tiles and topped by domes of brilliant, shimmering turquoise. I need to stop. This is going to be too long. I didn't realize this section was this long. Yeah, there's we're going to have to split this into parts, so 66. Definitely going to have to split this into parts. So, thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night.